in the jurisdiction is not a public official or employed by the city and just maintains a membership in a civic organization. So you got to find somebody that meets those three prongs and they're on it. Other than that, it's whoever you all would like to put on there. I can give you an example that, for example, I mentioned that the Fayette County Commission has a land reuse agency, and their board, they have a 5-member board, which is the statutory minimum. You have to have an odd number between 5 and 11. They went with 5, and they have the public member as one of their members. Then they have a member of the Fayette County Commission will sit on there as a member. They have as a member a representative of the NRG RDA or like entity, so Regional Development Authority representative, a representative of the County Commission's Beautification Committee or like entity related to redevelopment, and then another elected county official. To be blunt, that's a very restrictive board member list. I probably would say, for your all's purposes, keep it as broad as possible. I generally tell agencies that, especially government agencies, that you're already hamstrung by the laws enough. Don't restrict yourself even further, because it just, you get into situations where you limit the number of potential people that can serve. So that's kind of you guys have wide discretion on the terms. You can serve for a year, 2 years, 5 years. You can do that. Stagger them would probably be good as well, because I think the Fayette County Commission decided to put everybody on a 1-year membership. So that means every year you're either renewing 5 people or you got to go find new 5. So I think the function of that is more so that the Fayette County Commission was the first county commission in the state to have a land reuse agency, and as it stands, they're still the only county commission to have one. So I think there's a little bit of a caution as to how we're going to operate, to make sure that we're good, that things are okay, that it's working. Any questions? Any other questions? Any questions? Yes.
What about liability for the LRA and immunity for the individual board members?
Well, so as a governmental entity that is, for lack of under a broad phrase, they're what we would call a political subdivision. Okay, so the state is organized by, you have the state government, and then you have county government, and then the municipalities, but then you got things like boards of education or the planning commission or the land reuse agency or the URA. And those are what we call political subdivisions. Political subdivisions are governed immunity-wise by West Virginia Code 2912A. West Virginia Code 2912A is the Governmental Tort Claims and Insurance Reform Act, I think is the official title. But what it is, it's a list of immunities for political subdivisions as an entity, as well as individuals employed or under the political subdivision's employer board member. And that statute has a lot of very specific immunities in it. It's very broad, and employees or board members of political subdivisions are entitled to immunity unless basically they've acted maliciously. There's a statute that otherwise says that they could be individually liable, which this statute does not create any individual liability. Or I think the third one is outside the scope, manifestly outside the scope of their employment. So if they've done something manifestly outside the scope of their employment, then they would lose that liability immunity. So as an individual on the LRA, very broad immunity. The entity itself also would have, it would be a case-by-case scenario as to whether the entity itself has immunity. you do raise an interesting point in terms of liability is, you know, if anybody's a landlord here or owns property, there's always the risk of some, you know, if you rent it out, somebody renting is going to have an issue, or you're going to have to evict somebody, and those types of issues that could come about. You know, so you got some liability concerns, but otherwise covered under the 2912A community.
It's the LRA by inherently is going to have dilapidated properties, which are inviting accidents.
Yes.
And people occupying them who you don't want.
Yeah.
I think the liability issue could be a challenge.
It could be, but you get into, you know, so not only do you have 2912A available, which is specific statutory immunity for the entity, you would have all of your other, what we would call common law defenses to a claim. So let's say you had a piece of property and that the LRA owned, it was an old structure, abandoned building. The LRA boarded it up, but somebody broke in and they go to the third floor and then they fall through all 3 floors. Now they're like, oh, I broke my legs, I'm going to file a lawsuit. Well, they'd be trespassing, right? And in West Virginia law, a landlord or a property owner owes no duty of care to a trespasser. And so that's an immunity that's outside of the scope of the immunities that would be available to the political subdivision. So they would have that immunity too. Like that's really, to me, as a lawyer, I look at the liability risk of a situation like that. Somebody enters the property that shouldn't have entered the property and they've injured themselves and now they're going to sue you. But you would have your standard defenses, you know, your trespasser was an open, obvious condition, things like that, as well as your statutory 2912A immunities that would be available to that. The other risk is when you are a government agency, you're dealing with property, so you always have to be careful that you're not taking anybody's property without arm's length transaction and things like that. But that's just standard real estate transactional things. Other questions, comments, concerns? This is, and so one of the things that you could do, and if you're interested, is of course you could create the entity and then select the board members and then not initially fund it until they come up with a plan to be funded. There's no requirement that the city fund it. You could create this agency and allow the agency to get formed up, get the board together, get them meeting, and come up with a plan. And then then they could come to the city and make an appropriations request and go through that aspect as well. So there's no requirement that you would have to fund with respect to their creation. So they're supposed to be self-funded, but the reality is there's no real mechanism from a startup perspective to fund them. The legislature's not handing out money to LRAs yet. We'll keep trying, keep asking, but right now they're not. But there are many ways to acquire properties that you don't have to purchase. People can transfer them. Other governmental agencies can transfer them to them. A private citizen could transfer it without money. Just say, here, I have this property, you don't like it. Here you go. You can also use a land reuse agency in connection with your code enforcement. If you've got and it's kind of the carrot and the stick, you know, the stick is your zoning or your code enforcement officers. You got a structure that is violating all kinds of codes. So the code enforcement officer comes and with the stick of, we're writing you all these citations. You got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do everything else. Well, the carrot is you could just get rid of the property. If you can't take care of it, here's an agency that you can deed the property over to. That'd make your code enforcement issues go away because you wouldn't own the property anymore. So you've got the potential for a carrot and a stick situation there too, depending on how aggressive you want to use it. That's another option as well. I think Charleston and Huntington do that a little bit. Try to take problematic houses and really just try to put a lot of pressure, legal pressure. If people are violating the law, then they're violating the law. But some pressure, some things that can help relieve that is here's the carrot of you can get rid of this property. And you also find, and I think you guys would know a lot better than I would, but you find that sometimes property someone all of a sudden just gets this piece of property because a relative died and they maybe don't even fully know that they own it. And they live in California, but they've got this vacant lot that the grass is 10 feet tall and they're never going to take care of it. And if you look at it and you say, oh, so-and-so owns it, they're a out-of-state owner, the land reuse agency could reach out to them and be like, you realize you have this piece of property and it looks like it's in trouble with code enforcement. Like, we'd be willing to take it off your hands, if you don't want it. And you'd be surprised. There's a large number of people who are like, I don't want this. Take it. They don't know what to do with it. They don't want to sell it. They don't want to go through the process of selling it. They're not here. They don't care. It's an opportunity for sometimes people that have property that they don't really want because they didn't realize they had it or they just can't handle it. An opportunity for that property to go there.
What happens if there's a conflict between the reuse agency and the city? Like, for example, they own property that has multiple code violations that they don't have the funds, or that authority is not willing to do anything.
That would be a difficult. I mean, the land reuse agency would be subject to the laws and the codes and things like that. I mean, so the enforcement of that would be, what would probably ultimately happen is that they would get, hey, land reuse agency, you owe this property that the building fell down and now it's a hazard, clean it up. We don't have the funds to clean it up. We're going to assess you. Here's your assessment. We don't have the money to pay it. We're going to attach a lien on your property then. And then so when they do finally sell it, first lien, the city will get their money for the assessments on that. And then land reuse agency would get the remainder if there's any when the title gets cleared through a property transaction. Likely be. But hopefully we would there would be discussions and things that we would avoid a conflict. But because you all are separate agencies, city can enforce the law against the agents. Questions, comments?
And this would all be set up by ordinance.
Yes. So what would happen is first the city would pass an ordinance through their regular ordinance process. Once the ordinance is set up, the one thing, and this is a weird nuance of the statute, but in your initial ordinance creating this entity, you have to identify by name the board members. It doesn't make any sense to me because for a city, for example, you've got to go through 2 readings. So in the first reading, there's going to be identified names of board members on there. What if it doesn't pass? Well, they never become board members. But the law, for whatever reason, was written that in the ordinance, you have to identify the first board members on there. Just the first. You don't have to amend your ordinance every time you change board members. It's just they want the first names of the first board members on there. So you do have to do that. But the other, and then the city has a lot of discretion in how they want to organize it and things like that. But once it's created and it's passed and those board members assemble, it then becomes the board members' responsibility to create their own policies and procedures consistent with the ordinance of how they're going to operate. So the city would create the entity and the broad overview of how it's to operate, and then kind of the nuts and bolts of it would be up to the agency to create through their own policy making process, policies and procedures.
But that initial creation, that initial ordinance, if the city council were to place safeguards, you know, term, who sits on the board, where those folks come from, limits of the time you serve, staggered or however, whatever, what kind of property they can and cannot deal with.
You can
That could be undone.
It cannot. And the only way it could be undone is if this city would amend its ordinance.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It could be subsequently.
But it couldn't be undone by the LRA.
Right.
But the city council itself could amend their ordinance. Yeah. That's the only way that, like, so if you create the LRA and you say you can only target X type of property, that's all the LRA can do. They cannot do anything about it unless and until this city council would amend that ordinance and broaden it or things like that.
But my point is, if you were to put safeguards in place in creating that land reuse authority, you know, to prevent political cronies selling or buying property from that board, that could be undone.
It could be, but they'd still be subject to the Ethics Act. That can never be undone. Yet the West Virginia Ethics Act will always apply because the statute, you can never, unless the legislature changes the statute, the Ethics Act always applies by statute from the legislature to this entity.
But like you said, the land reuse authority could sell property for $1.
They could, if they deem it to be in the best interest of the of the mission and things of the land reuse agency. And of course, that would be subject to open meeting laws and all of that. I mean, they couldn't do that in the dark. They'd at least have to put their name and raise their hand that they voted to approve that before that would go down. But I mean, it is possible. It is possible. So yeah. Any other questions or comments or concerns? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are at that almost closing time. Do any of the department heads have anything to add to the reports already? Okay. We do not have any MS4 information this month, so if we may have a motion to accept reports from our departments, we will wrap this up.
I'll make that motion. We accept the reports.
Can we have a second?
I'll second.
Now we have a motion and a second to accept all the department reports. All those in favor? All opposed? Any council comments? The ayes have it, sorry. Any council comments?
Mayor, I do.
Yes, sir.
I have a few. I'll try to be really quick. First, I wanna give my support, because it's probably not gonna be an agenda item or anything, but for what Allison said tonight, I just want to go on that I support what she's trying to do there. I think that's a great thing. And she was just saying she basically wanted council support blessing. So I want to go on that I support what she's trying to do. The second thing is I want to give a shout out to the Public Works Department. The past couple of weeks, they've been out picking up litter. When the weather has not really been presentable to do big projects, they've been picking up litter and brushing sidewalks with the street sweeper, cleaning it up and leaf blowing sidewalks. I caught them up in a residential area today, and that helps make the city look good, helps restore pride. And I also want to give a shout out to Dreama. I'm assuming you made this morning's post on the Facebook thing. I like that. That was very positive, and I think we need a whole lot more of that, and maybe start adding some pictures, you know, it's a beautiful day, they'll hike in the Needles Eye, or a picture of the skate park, or just something, or maybe feature a business, you know, each week, something that promotes local things going on, and kind of let people know that we support them. We want to see them succeed, and maybe create some positivity, because there was a comment on there. Somebody made a positive comment, said, I love seeing this. It, you know, creates positivity. And I want to thank you for doing that. And then lastly, I want to say, Mr. Smallwood, first, I want to say thank you for the years that you served on the council. And because of that, as you well know, we allowed you much more time than the 3 minutes the previous council would have. But however, I want to note that I feel like most of those things brought up that was mentioned, that was not completed. I think I may have been wrong on this. May have had it as early as a 2019 date. I know I heard 2020, 2021, 2023, but some things that fell through during the term that didn't get done, those things fell through during the term before this council. And that was a result that they didn't follow up on their actions to ensure some of those things were done. And I don't think that this council should be accused of not completing those items that could have been done during that term. Had they not been more concerned with pushing a bank purchase, which is one of the reasons we're dealing with an extremely tight budget, and not just the purchase, but trying to get the process started before the election, they may have had time and funds to complete many of those items that were mentioned here tonight that we're getting accused of not doing. And that's all I have on that.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I want to commend Charlie, because I've had several comments about the street department, so. Chief Wiseman, if you got some spare time, you might have some push a broom, but I doubt they have spare time. But, hey, I had 2 ladies today that come by the bank. They wouldn't be able to be here tonight. They live on State Avenue out there. Down at the end of the road, there's 2 houses that are burned. They've called to see, you know, whose responsibility or how. It's a blight on their street, and you know they're just concerned because they're not totally down, so someone could get inside. It's a safety thing, so who don't have responsibility? I think one, he set his own house on fire, so he's in jail.
One of them out there, we're working with the insurance agency to, they have to secure the funds from the proceeds of insurance stuff, so that's the line. So we're working on that.
I think the other one is actually for sale. State. I was just out there a couple of weeks ago. I believe that the one closest one to state is actually up for sale, and now the one
We have to go through that process of, we have to place the lane and notify them.
I know they're homeless and stuff.
Through agenda items?
You all want the historic district on.
And I do support that Allison brought up tonight. That sounded great.
Allison, that means.
I think she left already. But yes, that is a great program, and that was what I was telling y'all before in the vacant building, vacant building registry was talking about. Allison had already talked to me about that process that might be able to help some of these vacant properties. I really believe that is going to be a good thing for the city, and I do believe that we need to give her that support.
And what about the land reuse agency?
Yes.
Any announcements? All right, Mr. Smallwood, you.
Yes, sir. 8 of those items was from last year. I just want to make that
All right,
correction.
all right, thank you. We will have our budget workshop right after the meeting, our next council meeting. No, that is incorrect, not having a budget workshop. Next council meeting will be April 14th, 2025, and also the laying of the levy will be tax day, April 15th, 2025. If all minds are clear, anyone want to make that one motion that we adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
All right, thank you all for coming. I appreciate seeing commissioners and a former commissioner here. And I see Toad's gotten out of here, but